Welcome to my YouTube channel at Sci-Fi Tales Pules. Please subscribe, like, and share to support my channel. The Great Hall was filled with silence. The sound of boots and armor echoed against the high stone walls, as the guards stood still in their places. At the center of the hall sat Queen Alara on her throne. Her crown shone under the light of burning torches, but her eyes showed sadness. The war had been long and cruel. Her people had fought with all their strength, but the enemy grew stronger every day. The queen looked at her council. They whispered about surrender, about giving up the fight. She knew what that meant. If they surrendered, her kingdom would fall, her people would be broken, and her family name would be forgotten. Her heart felt heavy, but she kept her back straight. She could not show weakness, even when hope was slipping away. Among the crowd in the hall stood Daniel Hart. He was not a soldier or a noble. He was just an ordinary man, one of many who had come to hear the queen's words. He kept his head low, but inside his chest his heart was beating fast. He felt a strange pull, like something inside him was waiting to be called. The queen rose from her throne. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of sorrow. She told her people that they had given everything, that they had fought with courage, but the end might be near. The sound of her words spread through the hall like a cold wind. Men and women lowered their heads. Some began to weep quietly. Daniel raised his eyes and looked at the queen. She was strong, yet he saw how tired she was, how much she carried alone. He clenched his fists. He could not explain why, but in that moment he felt the pain of every soldier, every family, every life lost in the war. It was as if all of it flowed into him, pressing against his soul. He did not know it yet, but something was changing inside him. His breath grew heavy, and his vision became sharp. His body felt alive in a way it never had before. While the queen spoke of defeat, Daniel's spirit began to burn with something new, something that would not allow surrender. The crowd inside the hall was restless. Queen's words had shaken everyone, and whispers of fear moved from one corner to another. Some spoke of surrender. Others spoke of fleeing while they still had the chance. Hope was almost gone, and the heavy silence returned. Daniel Hart stood among them, his hand shaking slightly. He did not know why his body felt so different. His chest rose and fell with strong breaths. His sight was sharp, his hearing clear, and his thoughts burned like fire. Something was happening deep within him, and it was stronger than fear. Queen Alara lowered her eyes for a moment. She had carried the crown for years, but now the weight was more than gold and jewels. It was the weight of her people's survival. She knew her words could no longer hold the line of faith. Her heart told her this might be the last time she stood before her people as their ruler. Daniel stepped forward. At first, no one noticed. He was a common man, one of many in the crowd. But then a glow seemed to rise from him, faint at first, then brighter. A gasp came from the people nearby, and soon the whole hall turned to look. His body changed in small ways. His voice, when he spoke, carried a strange power. "We cannot surrender," he said, his eyes fixed on the queen. "Not while there is breath in our lungs. Not while we are human." The words struck the hall like thunder. Men and women lifted their heads. The queen herself stared in wonder. This was no speech from a noble or a commander. These words came from a man who had lived as one of them, and yet he now stood with strength beyond any of them. Daniel's hands glowed faintly, and the air around him seemed alive. He felt every story of sacrifice, every drop of courage, every dream of freedom. It was as if the spirit of all people before him was burning in his veins. The queen stepped down from her throne. She walked closer, her eyes fixed on him. For the first time in many years, there was a spark of hope in her face. She did not speak, but her silence was enough. Everyone knew something had changed. The guards inside the hall moved their hands to their swords, unsure if they should see Daniel as a threat or a savior. The people pressed closer, their eyes wide with fear and hope. Daniel stood firm, his glowing presence calm and steady, though inside his heart beat like a drum. Queen Alara stopped in front of him. Her eyes searched his face, looking for answers. She saw no fear there, only resolve. She raised her hand slowly and touched his shoulder. The light that surrounded him grew brighter, and the crowd gasped again. "He is one of us," the queen said. Her voice was steady now, filled with strength that had been gone only moments ago. "He carries the same blood, the same pain, the same fire that all of us share. This war is not over. The people listened. Some cried, some shouted. Soldiers who had come only to hear words of surrender now stood tall again. They looked at Daniel as if he was the proof that hope had not died. Daniel turned to face them. His voice carried through the hall without effort. "I am no king, no lord, no warrior born to lead," he said. "But I cannot watch my people fall. We are more than flesh and bone. We are our history, our courage, and our legacy. Stand with me, and we will not be broken." The words spread like fire. The crowd answered with a cheer that shook the walls. For the first time in years, the sound of unity filled the great hall. Men and women stood together, their fear washed away by Daniel's strength.
Oh.
The queen stepped back and looked at him with pride. She saw not just a man, but a symbol of what her people had forgotten. She lifted his hand high, and the light that surrounded him shone across every face in the room. Outside, the sound of war drums still echoed in the distance. The enemy was moving closer with each day. But inside the hall, something greater had awakened. The people no longer looked beaten. They looked ready to fight again. And at the center of it all stood Daniel Hart, no longer a simple man in the crowd, but the living proof that the spirit of humanity could rise when all seemed lost. The battlefield was ready. Smoke rose from burned villages, and the ground shook with the march of enemy forces. Their drums beat like thunder, steady and cold. The kingdom's army stood waiting, but their hearts were no longer filled with despair. The memory of Daniel in the hall, his glowing strength, and the queen's steady voice had given them courage. Daniel walked at the front beside Queen Alara. His steps were calm, but his eyes burned with determination. Every soldier who looked at him felt their own strength return. His presence reminded them that they were not fighting only for land or for a crown, but for their people, their families, and their future. The queen rode forward on her horse. Her crown shone under the gray sky, and her voice carried across the lines. "Today we fight not as broken men and women," she said, "but as one people who will never bow. Stand strong, for this is our day." The cry of the soldiers shook the air. They lifted their swords and shields, ready for what was to come. Daniel's body glowed faintly again, and the soldiers closest to him felt the warmth of it like fire in their hearts. When the enemy charged, the clash was fierce. Metal struck metal, and the sound of battle rolled across the fields. The kingdom's soldiers fought with strength they did not know they had. Blades that once faltered struck true, and shields that once shook held firm. Daniel fought at the front, his movements fast and sure. His strength seemed endless, and every strike of his hand sent fear through the enemy ranks. The soldiers followed him, their courage fed by his presence. Even when the enemy's numbers pressed hard against them, the kingdom's men and women stood together and did not break. For every fall, another rose. For every wound, another fighter pushed forward. The queen watched from the center of the line. Her heart raced, but for the first time she believed victory was possible. Daniel had become more than a man. He was the living fire that carried her people forward. The battle raged on, and though the enemy pressed with all their might, the kingdom held the field. What had once seemed impossible was now within reach. Hope had returned, and it burned brighter than the fire of war. The battlefield grew quiet as the smoke drifted across the broken ground. The clash of steel and the cries of war slowly faded. The enemy, once sure of their victory, now lay scattered and defeated. The kingdom's soldiers stood tall, their armor battered, but their spirits alive. Daniel Hart stood at the front, his chest rising with heavy breaths. His glow was fading, but the strength in his eyes remained. He looked over the field, where men and women who had once feared the end now raised their swords in triumph. The fire within him had not only given him strength, but had awakened the courage that lived in all of them. Queen Alara rode forward, her horse moving past the weary soldiers. She stopped beside Daniel, her crown tilted slightly, her face marked with dirt and sweat, yet her eyes shone with pride. She looked at her people and spoke with a clear and steady voice. "This day will be remembered," she said. "Not because of me, not because of crowns or thrones, but because a man among us reminded us of who we are. We are human, we're strong, and we do not bow. Our legacy is not built on fear, but on courage." The soldiers raised their voices, cheering until the sound filled the skies. Daniel lowered his head, humbled by their cries. He knew he had changed, but he also knew the truth. He was not a hero born of power alone. He was a man who carried the spirit of all who came before him, and that spirit had risen when it was most needed. The queen placed her hand on his shoulder. "You have given back what I feared was lost," she told him. "Hope. You have shown that even in the darkest hour, the strength of our people will always rise." Together they looked across the field, where the sun broke through the smoke and shone on the battered earth. It was a new dawn, a sign that the kingdom would rise again. The war had nearly broken them. But now they stood ready to rebuild, stronger than before. Daniel Hart would never again be just a man in the crowd. His name and his deeds would be remembered, not as a tale of magic or chance, but as proof that when all seemed lost, the human spirit could transform and carry a people to victory. Thank you for watching and being part of our community.